He's somewhat harmless.
Feel good.
I would say third.
Well, we'll go ahead and call the first day of our annual budget hearings to order. And looks like we got a lot of information before us, so Eric, I'll go ahead and let you set the tone for how this is going to proceed.
Okay. Do you want to take it on real quick?
Yes. Danny Ellis,
Here.
Nancy Barker, John Gibson, Joshua Gillum,
Here.
Tom Kern.
Tom's gonna be here, he said just 15 minutes away.
We need to try and remember when they walk in to recognize it for the record. Robbie Palmer.
Here.
Jason Roach. We have 5 members present constituting a quorum. We also have with us Larry Klontz.
No. I think you don't like that.
Yeah, I unlocked that doors.
Y'all want me to give him a second, or you want me to just jump into it?
Yeah, let's see him just do it.
Okay. I figured we're gonna be here all day anyway, so what's the deal?
That's right.
Nancy, didn't you say you was the one bringing biscuits this morning?
Yes.
No, I thought you were.
Oh.
That was the last call last night.
Oh, okay. I must have forgot.
Just for
Test, you're supposed to.
information. That's just for the agency.
I swear I heard the wrong ones. He was lying.
Yeah, that's a danger.
I'm probably seeing Debbie.
Yeah.
This is mine, I was just showing it to you.
Oh,
We added the cleaning.
okay, so just to explain what I've handed out to you, of course, you've got your budget notebook there with you, and then just a few loose handouts I've given you. One is the new requests, the other one is the budget snapshot. We'll refer back to those later. When you open your book, the first thing on the left side there in your sleeve is your schedule. And the first thing is budget review, so I'll get us started with that. Nobody objects? All right, the very first page in your notebook is the real property assessment summary. This is information I get from the property assessor, which allows me to calculate the penny. You'll see down there in the bottom left corner, handwritten, you'll see the value of the penny, $119,944.35. The very next page is from the comptroller. That is the ratio we've been speaking of. We estimated it at 69%. It came in at 0.692, so our estimates were extremely close. The very next page is your CTAS elected official salary schedules. On there, you can go down to our population class, which is the 50,000 to 64,999. And then as you scroll across there, you see what our elected officials are being paid. Good morning. You'll stare at us, step down to reflect the record. I'll try to catch that in a minute. 8:33. On that page, you'll notice a few handwritten adjustments there. That is because the sheriff received a salary supplement, which pushes his overall total compensation up, and then subsequently pushes the mayor's overall compensation up, because he has to be 5% higher than the tier of sheriff or road superintendent. So you'll see some manual calculations there. The other one you'll see up in the top right corner is a COLA for the judges, and they received a 4%. The state employees last year was actually calculated at 10.02% of COLA. However, there's a TCA that caps elected officials at 5% in any given year. So you'll see a 5% increase for the elected officials. The next page is just adding more detail.
We get Tom out of
So 8:33 is the current ride.
Okay. 8:33. Okay, sorry.
You're fine. The very next page just goes into that 10.2% being capped at 5%. The next page is from the AOC office talking about the 4% for the judges. Any questions on that information before we jump into the actual budget? All right. You'll flip over to your general fund budget document tab. You have an index there with all your page numbers. Of course, also your page numbers are on that itinerary schedule as well for your convenience. You would flip over to those blue pages, we will jump into the budget notes. Tax rate and assessment on which to base the property tax collections. This budget is based on the current information received from the property assessor's office, with the total assessment being $1,290,024,161. The assessment has been reduced $300,000 to allow for any further appeals or other changes. You'll see the penny there at 100% would have been $128, but we always factor in a 93% collection rate, therefore our penny is $119,944.35 for the 23-24 fiscal year. All budgets use that 93% collection rate. Last year's budget assessment was $1,342,683,067. This year's assessment is $52,658,906 lower due to that ratio. We did have growth, but because of that ratio, that's how much is off of this year's assessment, which is why we have a declining value on our penny this year. The 2013 assessment summary from the property assessor's office, as well as the ratio letter, which we just went over, is included in your budget information if you need the notebook. Revenue, current property tax. The estimate for current property tax is based on the current property tax rate of 2.3177, of which 93.03 cents is allocated for this fund. The ratio is now at 0.6921, as we have now 2 years removed from the reappraisal. This is the largest ratio Hawkins County has ever had. Farthest one I can find back in 2008-9 when we had that recession was about 0.8 something, 0.86, 0.5. So this is it's pretty substantial for us. Through the month of March, we have collected 101.5% of the budgeted property tax collections for 22-23. Therefore, even before collections for April through June, we have exceeded our estimate projections. This is pretty typical. The majority of your property tax comes in December and February. So it's not uncommon for us to exceed that point already. The rate of budget current property tax collected for 21-22 fiscal year in March was 101.3%. Prior year tax collections, interest, and penalty accounts, revenue collected in these accounts will be approximately $112,000 more than what was budgeted. Next year has been increased to reflect the surplus. Pickup taxes. The estimated revenue for the 22-23 fiscal year is slightly below budget. In prior years, the pickup taxes for Valdor and San Don. Next year's projections has been decreased slightly to match. Wheel tax account. The estimated revenue for the 22-23 fiscal year is slightly above budget. Estimated collections have been listed separately on the budget document so the commissioners can see the original wheel tax amount is collected, as well as the additional $30 and $10 collections. This is what allowed the general fund to be balanced for the fiscal year 17-18 per words from the state comptroller's office. The $10 fee is also able or eligible to fund other public safety expenditures, including volunteer fire department, rescue squads, Hawkins County Emergency Response Team, ambulance service, American Red Cross, and Hawkins County Humane Society contributions. Any consideration of a special funding request from these agencies and or public safety departments will be funded from the undesignated amount in the reserve if available. However, based on our revenue and expenditure projections after the 21-22 fiscal year increases to several of these agencies, the expenditures outpace the revenue, and therefore there will no longer be a reserve after 22-23. So we have funded our contributions at a level that exceeds that $10 wheel tax contribution. There is no reserve. Other taxes, fines, and fees. These revenues have been based on actual amounts posted through March 2023, I should say, plus estimates for the remainder of the year. These accounts appear to be stabilized after needing to be reduced 21-22 fiscal year. No further reduction is needed at this point. Litigation tax, corporate security. It appears that we will collect the amount of $80,000 that was budgeted in 22-23. So our budget is the same estimated revenue for 23-24.
Eric, sorry, the interruption.
You're fine.
The record reflected the commissioner vote here.
Thank you. We're on page 2 of the blue notes in the general fund tab. Contract with the Prisoner Board. Hawkins County receives its revenue for housing state inmates. Total collections for the January board bill have surpassed the budget amount by roughly $40,000. This revenue is rebounding from a pandemic reduction and is being increased by $175,000 for the 23-24 fiscal year. This is still a greatly reduced revenue from years past. It will need to be increased to reflect current collections. The decline of the board bill was a direct result of the pandemic and the effect it had on the court system and the state prison system. The state had a surplus of beds when in years past there was always a shortage. This revenue has rebounded, but is still decreased from previous projections. For reference, in 17-18, the board bill brought in roughly $1.6 million. Many of the revenue accounts posting run a month behind, so for the first draft, actual revenue figures are being estimated for at least 3 months, if not 4. By the end of the fiscal year, when actual revenues are posted, total revenue will change, hopefully with a positive result instead of negative. Going over to page 3, expenditures. The elected officials will receive raises for the 23-24 fiscal year according to the county officials' salary schedule publication from CTAS. A copy is included with your budget information at the beginning of your notebook behind the assessment information. Step raises are included for all general fund employees, but no COLAs have been calculated yet, although several, if not all, officials have inquired about one. Medical insurance. Medical insurance estimates for the 23-24 fiscal year include a 12% rate increase. We have left the employee-employer split the same for the first draft at 30% to the employee and 70% to the employer. It will likely be August before we know what the increase will be. Since the plan is November 1 through October 31st, we have calculated a 12% increase for 8 months. The total cost of medical insurance has increased since changing this plan due to more employees picking up the insurance as well as adding their dependents. The Sheriff's Department and jail budgets are usually estimated to include extra policies to be available should there be a need for a new or current employee to participate in our medical insurance plan. Additional policy premiums have also been included in account 58600-207, from which retirees' medical insurance premiums are paid. Funds should be available if an employee must pick up insurance in the middle of the year, resulting in the need to transfer appropriations from the 58600 account to the appropriate office or department. And you'll see a significant increase in that budget when we go over there. That has not been touched for years, and as the insurance has continued to go up, that is not spread as far as it did in the past. So we were starting to run short on that. So you'll see an increase there when we get to 58600. The county allows a retiree hired prior to November 1st, 2017 to continue in the medical insurance plan until he or she reaches age 65 or becomes Medicare eligible. The county continues to pay its portion of a retiree's premium until that time. If the retiree has a dependent and wishes to continue coverage on the dependent until he or she reaches age 65, the county pays no portion of that premium. Additional changes may be made in medical insurance estimates before the final budget draft if there are personnel changes or changes in coverage before June 30th that we are made aware of. Employer contribution rate for retirement. Actuarial studies are now performed every year to determine the employer amount. We have received our rate calculation that will be in effect for July 1, 2023. The current employer contribution rate is 6.02%, with Hawkins County electing to pay 7% for Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System through June 30, 2024. This will help offset any future rate increases. Hawkins County is a contributory participant in Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System. This means that the employees contribute 5% of their salary, with the county paying the employer's share. Some counties and entities are non-contributory, meaning that that agency pays the employees 5% as well as the employer's share. TCRS benefits are not based on the amount paid in for each employee, but rather on the 5 highest consecutive years of salary and the number of years of service credit. Contributions to area agencies. Contributions have been included for budget calculations in the 23-24 fiscal year at the same level as was budgeted for 22-23 for all agencies. Listings and documentation from area agencies will be included in the contribution request notebook. Contracts with government and public agencies. Most contracts with government and public agencies such as First Tennessee Human Resource Agency, Upper East Tennessee Human Development Agency, etc. have been budgeted at the same level as 22-23. The budget amount for the Johnson City Forensic Center has been included at Hawkins County's share of $130,367. Children's Comprehensive Services, Juvenile Detention Center, budget amount has been kept at $175,000. That one just fluctuates kind of how many children are sent, so it's kind of a hard one to control, so it just depends how many kids go in front of the judge and if he sends them. Other budget increases. The increase for computer maintenance contracts and other necessary expenditures to operate efficiently have been included in this first draft. Some requests above the previous year's budget have not been included and will not be until approved. See the additional request worksheet included in your budget information. Reminder, there is a maintenance of effort requirement for the Sheriff's Department, Property Assessor, Election Commission, and Library. The amount budgeted for workers' compensation insurance may change once we finalize our insurance quotes. We have the drug-free workplace program in effect and receive a 5% credit on our premium cost. We also receive a safety designee credit of 1%. General, solid waste, and highway funds pay their appropriate share of workers' compensation premiums with any applicable credits being applied. Even though rates may remain basically the same from year to year, the premiums will increase due to increases in wages. June 30th, 2024 unassigned fund balance. The first draft of the general fund budget shows an estimated unassigned fund balance of $10,365,100 at the end of the 23-24 fiscal year. After June 30th, 2023, this figure will change because the first draft usually will have expenditures slightly overestimated and the revenue underestimated. Actual expenditures in the sheriff's department and jail and actual revenues for the state board bills will be a major determining factor of the change in fund balance. The last several years, we have not had to do a tax anticipation note for general fund to operate until property taxes were collected. This should be true again this year. CTAS recommends that the general fund unassigned fund balance should be at least a minimum of 20% of total budget expenditures. The estimated unassigned fund balance for 23-24 is 47.48% of the total estimated expenditure and other uses. So we do have a healthy fund balance, which is a very, very good thing for the county. It is necessary to maintain a good fund balance to continue to obtain the bond rating that we have now. A rating of AA3 was assigned to the March 2021 bond issue. The financial health of Hawkins County will continue to be monitored by those in the bond investment market. Also, a good fund balance is needed when you have to make grant expenditures before filing for your reimbursement. Future budget changes. In future budget drafts, some expenditures funded by grant or insurance recovery funds may be switched from 22-23 to 23-24 if the project is not completed or underway before June 30th, 2023. This will not change the estimated fund balance for June 30th, 2024. It will just merely change what year that is reflected in. Any general fund questions? All right, hearing none, we generally don't review the individual budgets until the office holders come in here and we look at them together. So if you have any questions, you can ask those specific office holders. And then me and Sarah will present to you several of them that don't have the office holders or department heads to present to you today. So if there's nothing else on the general fund, we'll move right along to solid waste.
So, you might have said this, but that's a lot of information to process.
Yes, sorry. And I know I talked too fast, my apologies.
So I guess my first question would be, where are we in terms of, okay, so once the property tax increase took place, we were able to add some extra revenue, upwards of $2 million to the fund, to our revenue. So where our fund balance is projected to land at 10 million something, is that what
At the end of 23-24, we're projecting right now for 22-23 for it to end at 12.5.
Okay, so the projection for 23-24 takes into account the ratio that is the high ratio, 0.6 something.
6921.
Yeah,
Correct.
0.691. So essentially the ratio is going off our ability to generate revenue.
Correct.
To an amount of a couple $1 million.
Overall, not just in this fund, but if everybody would turn to page 1, I think it would kind of highlight that for you. In the very top line there, 40110 current property tax. The original budget for 22-23 was $11,006,000. Now, we did receive growth this year, but because of the ratio, you'll look at our 23-24 calculation, we're projected at 11.1, a reduction of $458,000. We typically don't have that to deal with. Normally, you'll see a slight increase from budget year to budget year on the property tax. Instead, this year, we're dealing with a $458,000 reduction. So that's what the ratio is really at.
And why is that hurt?
The ratio is done to assess the fair market value of where property is selling versus where it was when we had the full-on reappraisal. And so as I discussed with the committee, I think it was back in March, the public utilities and the tangible personal property said it wasn't fair that they're getting reviewed annually while the property owners are getting locked in for a 5-year period. So 2 years now, post reappraisal, we're in the 3rd year, ratio comes into effect. And when they compared those sales, that's where our ratio landed.
So, I mean, that's not something we do, that's something the state hands us.
Eric, I have a question.
Yes.
So, for looking at page 1 and 2, the estimated ending unassigned fund balance, 12.5 for 22-23, right? My question is, does that include any opioid or ARPA money?
So, good question. ARPA is completely separate. You will find no ARPA money in 101, okay? Now, as far as your baby doll money, your baby doll money was spent. You will see that embedded in the 22-23 budget year. So showing you that we're finishing this year projected as 178,000 in the red is actually not very bad at all, considering that is including that baby doll money being spent. Because that was about $1.6 million. So, although I'm not showing any numbers in the black, this is not nearly as bad as what I thought I was going to be showing you. Still not great news, but it is better than what I thought.
So the $458,000 decrease from 23-24 to 22-23 takes into account a 93% tax rate or tax collection too, right? So
Correct.
we're projecting with that cushion. So, and I hesitate to say this, but realistically, we may not come out that far behind.
No, historically, we're closer to 96, 97% collection rate. And so, but we want to be conservative with those property tax estimates. There's no victory in being too aggressive. It just sets on the wrong side of things when it doesn't happen. But no, that is a conservative estimate. You are correct. We should surpass that, but not to the tune of the $2 million deficit that we're showing. The largest swing that we generally have from year to year is office holders and department heads not fully exhausting their budget.
One other question I have, Eric.
Yes.
So looking at, again, on page 47, so the original budget for 22-23, total estimated expenditures was $21,017,500. Right? And then the actual, well, the estimated actual expenditures is 21.4.
Correct.
So the original budget that we projected almost a $1.6 million shortfall, but it's coming out to a $178,000 shortfall. My question is, since expenditures ended up being a little more, where did we make up the difference? How did we end up only 178 short instead of 1.6? Is it because of we collected more taxes than anticipated, more than 93%?
It is.
Does that make sense?
No, that's a perfectly good question. I would refer you to page 6.
Okay.
And the answer to your question is at the bottom of page 6. When you look at the original budget for the 22-23, total estimated revenues and other sources, and then when you look at the estimated 22-23, total estimated revenues and other sources, you'll see a fairly large discrepancy there.
Okay. Thank you.
You're very welcome.
And I appreciate Mr. Gillum making that point. I think it's interesting to note that when we projected a $1.6 million shortfall last year, that nobody was pulled from the fund balance, but $178,000 compared to 1.6 that we were projecting. I'd love to see that on the front page of the review, Mr. Gillum.
Well, that's the plan, I guess.
Starts out.
I mean, seriously, all in all, it's not all bad news. I wish we had a budget in the black to show you today, but again, this is also first draft. As more actuals come in, hopefully that number will even reflect a little better. But as a starting point for today, with only having postings done through March, not that bad. Now, the bigger issue is the 23-24 fiscal year. We have to protect ourselves as if office holders were going to fully exhaust their budgets, because once you grant it to them, as long as they're spending it in the appropriate manner, you can no longer restrict them from doing so. So we do need to protect ourselves against the $2 million deficit, as well as the fact that we have not yet addressed the request for new money, and we have not yet addressed the COLA, which would very much be in order for discussion with the way that the economy is handling our employees right now. So the current structure of the economy, medical insurance increases, if they don't receive anything, they've actually received a pay reduction, because the value of their pay will be less next year than it was this year.
Do you have any information about what surrounding counties are doing, comparable counties?
I do not, but I'd be happy to look into that. while we're discussing COLAs, in most years, we've waited for the direction of the budget committee to calculate some prospective COLAs and see how they hit. Last year was a little unique with the economy being the way it was. We came with the COLA right out the gate to present to you. We didn't do that this year, but one of the main reasons was we were spread short. We just kind of ran out of time. But we also have an issue. I don't know, some of you were here, some of you were not. But the last commission, we implemented a $10 minimum wage for part-time and a $12 minimum wage for full-time. Although at face value, that sounds like a very good thing, I cautioned against doing so. Not because I didn't think our employees were worth that, but because it was done a little too quickly. And long and behold, it's caused us grief now. We have a salary structure set up on years of service. So you're loyal to the county and you get a step raise annually. Unfortunately, now with those implementations done so quickly, that is not the case for all of our employees. So some of our employees are getting a step raise, and some of our employees will never see a step raise. Because with that change made suddenly, their whole tier was changed to the new minimum. So one of our hopes was to have enough time to try to rework those scales to equalize that, make it fair for all employees so that everybody is getting a step raise, not just some tiers of employees. So if that's the will of the commission to try to equalize that and to create fairness through all tiers of employees, all salary grades, a lower COLA may be in order, since we will also be adjusting the scales. If we're not going to adjust the scales, then a larger COLA would be in order.
What percentage of employees are not getting step raises now?
I don't have a percentage for you, but for instance, if you were a convenience center operator, which is a salary grade 2 position, from the day you're hired to the day you retire, you would never get a raise outside of a COLA, but you would never get a step raise. It also had a negative effect, I think, on one of our drivers. It also had a negative effect on housekeeping. It also had a negative effect on one of our assistant park employees. There's a handful of people who are not getting treated the same as our other employees now, unfortunately.
Help me understand why they're not getting, how setting the minimums affected that, them not getting step raises.
Because it was such a substantial jump for some of our lower paid employees that minimum surpassed all of their step increases.
Gotcha.
So instead of, getting 40 cents a year, they got a nice raise. So I mean, a lot of them weren't complaining then because they were pleased. They got a significant jump in pay. But now when the next year came, there was nothing else to look forward to. It was over.
So us setting the minimum that we set exceeded the top out amount? Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly what I'm saying.
Yeah.
And for some people,
That doesn't make a lot of sense, I agree. That the minimum is the top out amount.
the higher end is the top amount.
Yeah.
I mean, it doesn't promote loyalty as the years of service structure was designed to.
Yeah.
And for that tier, for salary grade 2, it is from 1 to 10, there is no movement. Now, for some of the other ones, it may happen, but you may have worked 7 years. And for another tier lower, you may work 5 years. But we've got about 5 to 6 tiers right now that all have the same starting pay. So, although something like that is a feel good, and it was, a good thing in a lot of senses, it's a good cautionary tale where we have to move slowly and methodically and examine and not move too hastily. Bless you. Anything else on the general fund? All right, hearing nothing, I'm going to roll along to solid waste. It's the next tab in your budget book. And again, starting on the blue notes. With the 2010-2011 fiscal year budget, accounting mandates change that require solid waste fund to be funded with designated revenue instead of a transfer from general fund that had been in the past made up a major portion of revenues for the solid waste sanitation operations. The revenue line items that were moved from general fund to solid waste are local option sales tax, business tax, cable TV franchise fees, and alcohol beverage tax. These particular revenues were chosen simply because the total of their anticipated revenues together with the usual revenues of waste hire disposal, sale of recycled materials, and solid waste grants gave us the total needed to fund the anticipated expenditures. Revenues, sales tax collections. We're estimating total collections to be $350,000 more than budgeted. This revenue was under budgeted for the 21-22 fiscal year at the advice of the senior comptroller due to some pandemic revenue collection changes. For the 23-24 year, we will increase that budget amount by $150,000. As those numbers come in more actuals, we may increase it more than that. Over the 22-23 fiscal year budget amount in a conservative effort to get more in line with the actual revenue. That's also revenue I'd like to speak to you guys about. They've made some changes in sales tax laws, and so the solid waste fund is one of our funds that is doing the best. It's one of the most healthy funds we have right now. There's some options that we can consider with that sales tax money. We can consider putting a cap, and anything raised above that cap, we could reroute somewhere else to a general capital projects fund would be my recommendation, so that we can purchase things in cash when necessary and not have to finance them. As interest rates increase, obviously it's less and less attractive to have to finance things. Now, of course, if you're going to build something large scale, you're probably still going to have to do a bond issue. But for some of our smaller capital improvements, you know, when Sarah needs a roof on a building or an HVAC unit replacement, it'd be great to have that fund healthy. When we started creating that general capital projects fund, we had 7 cents in it originally, dropped down to 5, dropped down to 4 something. And I think today I'm going to tell you it's down to 2 something cents. So that fund, although healthy because we haven't used it, the growth in it is diminishing every year. It's one of those things where you rob Peter to pay Paul, and you just hurt yourself in the long run. So with solid waste being as healthy as it is, my recommendation would be to strongly consider putting a cap, or we could do a percentage. 85% goes to solid waste, 15 goes to the general capital projects fund. But I like a hard cap because then you set a number you're comfortable with, and anything that exceeds beyond that would roll into your general capital projects. But both are feasible options, or you can leave it in solid waste. But solid waste fund is very healthy and doesn't really need to recognize all of the sales tax to stay solvent at this point. Anyway, business tax. Tax collections for business tax appears to be the same as it was budgeted. We are budgeting 23-24 at the same $350,000 as we did in 22-23. Cable TV franchise license, even though collections are estimated to surpass the budgeted figure, collections do appear to be declining compared to previous years. Therefore, we are leaving the budget estimate for 23-24 at $150,000. Sale of recycled materials, total collections have been estimated at roughly $5,000 less than the budgeted amount. Thus, we are leaving this revenue at the same figure as last fiscal year. Solid waste grants on page 2. $27,500 has been budgeted for a statewide tire grant based on current collections. This has been increased by $2,500 from the prior year, even though actual revenues may fluctuate from year to year. Alcohol beverage tax. Total collection should be about $6,000 greater than the budgeted amount. Next year's estimates will remain unchanged at $128,000. Sale of equipment. There was one sale of equipment during the 22-23 fiscal year, with one still pending. If that sale is not finalized before the end of the fiscal year, then it would be sold in the subsequent year. The surplus trash trucks are sold, with the proceeds being used to buy new trash trucks. The proceeds from the sale did not equal the cost of the new trucks, thus the reserve from prior year sales of surplus trucks was used to bridge the difference. There should be some $95,500 in reserve at the end of June 2023. However, this amount may be less by the end of 23-24. We've been very fortunate. A lot of times we've been able to lock in some of these prices before some of the increases, and then by the time that the sale rolls around, we reflect some of these increases in used vehicles. So I thought this reserve would be pretty much diminished by now, but we've been able to hold on to this solid waste reserve a little bit longer than I thought. Expenditures. Some of the salaries in the past were a mixture of full-time and part-time employees. From the 19-20 fiscal year forward, we have separated those into 2 different line items for the benefit of the solid waste director as well as the accounting department. There's a 12% estimated increase included for health insurance from June 23 through June 24. Likely be August before we know the actual rate increase. The estimated amount for workers' compensation insurance may change when we receive our final insurance quotes. However, it appears that we are sufficiently budgeted for workers' compensation in all categories, so the appropriate amounts should not change. Appropriated amounts. All budgets in solid waste saw a reduction in state retirement due to the new TCRS rate of 7% in 1920, down from the 8.68 it was in 1819. The same rate of 7% has been applied from 1920 through 23-24. Sanitation management, we have increased trustees commission $2,000 due to revenue increases. Waste pickup, There's a part-time personnel line item in that budget, however, we have not been able to keep a part-time driver employed. In the 13-14 budget, we increased the overtime line item and decreased part-time and continue this through 23-24 budgets. If we can keep a part-time driver employed, we can do a budget amendment to move funds back to part-time from overtime. Convenience centers, this budget was affected by the new $12 per hour minimum wage rule for full-time employees and $10 per hour minimum wage rule for part-time employees in the 21-22 fiscal year. Other waste collections, no longer in use for a budget year in the 18-19 fiscal year. All the appropriations from this budget are now in the recycling center. Recycling center is a 19-20 fiscal year budget. Recycling center salaries are now broken out into full-time and part-time employees. This budget was also affected by the new $12 minimum wage rule for full-time employees and $10 per hour minimum wage rule for part-time employees in the 21-22 fiscal year. Landfill operation and maintenance, the contract with VFI has been budgeted with a 12% increase over 22-23 fiscal year, but this is only an estimate. In years past, they follow some type of CPI, and some years we've seen a pretty large increase, pretty sizable increase. I would not be surprised to see that again once the actual contract comes in. 1 year, Mr. Lilly was able to negotiate with them for us and get that reduced, so we'll just have to play that by ear as that contract comes to us. Other waste disposal, this functions for waste tire disposal and is funded partially by tipping fees and a state grant. Interest on notes, this line item is budgeted in case there is a need to do a tax anticipation note to be able to operate until revenues are received. We have not had to do it for the last several years and don't anticipate to this year either. Bottom line for solid waste, it appears that the revenue budget will support expenditures for this fund with no revenues needed. The estimated ending unassigned fund balance for the 23-24 fiscal year is $3.7 million. Any questions on solid waste? Glance over page 1 there, you'll notice the very top revenue, 40210, local option sales tax. You'll notice the actual collections for 21-22 were 1.8. We're estimating this year 1.8, 1.5, excuse me. And you see we only budgeted 1.5 and are only going up 1.65 for 23-24. So that's that revenue I was discussing, that we could possibly implement that cap or percentage split and make our general capital projects fund a little healthier. I think it was Mr. Gillen who asked me one time how we get ahead of some of these projects. That would be my recommendation on how we get ahead of some of those projects, to have a healthy general capital projects fund so that we can bite off projects as they come to us and not have to kick the can down the road and then ultimately they get more expensive anyway. So the healthier our general capital projects fund is, the less projects we have to put on the back burner, the less projects we have to finance.
We said that again, that we need to split what now?
That local option sales tax, when they've changed some laws on that, it's become so healthy that this fund is growing. Most of we want all our funds to grow, but this one's growing at a rate that's really not necessary to support its expenditures. This is one of our healthiest funds, per the expenditures anyway. And general fund has a larger fund balance, but has also a lot more expenditures to fund. So I think we could consider putting a cap on how much sales tax revenue this fund receives, and then diverting anything in excess of that cap over to our general capital projects. You guys would direct it to go anywhere, but my recommendation would be to put it in the general capital projects. You put it in other funds, it gets ate up in general operation. You put it in general capital projects, it's only spent when you greenlight a project.
Is there a state regulation on what the fund balance has to be in this particular fund versus the expenditures or whatever?
I told you in the general fund they recommend 20%. I don't know if that's their standard across the board for all funds, but again, this fund is in very healthy shape.
Yeah.
And if you want to turn over to page 8, you'll see that. You'll see that in 21-22 we increased this fund by almost $1 million, $929,000. And we're estimating right now, early first draft, we're estimating almost $500,000 this year. So, although I don't want to see this go into a deficit, we don't need to see it increase at that level. So I do think it would be safe to consider taking some of that sales tax and diverting it.
about?
It's a good question. I've been tossing that around. I've not settled on a number yet.
So we would designate it for capital project if we moved today. Is that-
That would be my recommendation. That's where I would like to see it go. Any other questions on solid waste? All right, hearing none, we'll move right along. Next one is your drug fund. I don't have any notes prepared on that one. It is a relatively small fund, just 1 point of interest. If you would turn over to page 2, I will show you there that there is a transfer in down there towards the bottom of $300,000. That was from the baby doll money. Just want to show you that that is reflected in the budget, and it has greatly increased the amount of years that I think we can support this drug fund now. In the years last year, I recommended considering giving it some additional revenue. We didn't give it any property tax or any additional revenues, but due to the baby doll money and a reduction in the budget, now this fund is a lot healthier. Any questions on the expenditures for this one, I would refer to the chief deputy or sheriff when they're here to present. But also, if you look on page 4, you'll see how that fund balance increased. Fund balance in 21-22 was down to $198,000. This year, we're projecting that up to $652,000. So that $53,000 deficit only takes us down to $603,000. So that $300,000 infusion from the baby doll money is going to keep this fund solvent for several years to come. Bottom line, I'm no longer worried about that fund. All right, moving right along. ARPA. This one's been quite the headache, quite the adventure. This is where you'll see all those expenditures. It's a little unique. This has been an interest-bearing account, so you'll see there at the top, 44110, you'll see some interest earnings. There are some other interest earnings that have not yet been posted, so there are more earnings for this money than that. You will see down there the grant. That number does not tie back to the amount we received. The reason being, accounting standards, how they've asked us to treat this money, they've actually asked us to hold it as a liability. It's a little unusual, but it's considered a liability owed back to the federal government until we actually have a project that we spend it on. So they've asked me not to recognize revenue until cash is actually spent. That's not typically how we do things, but that's how they've structured this one. But if I didn't show revenue, at least from the projects that you've appropriated, we would have a negative fund balance on paper, even though the money's been in the bank from day one. So, just a little odd situation, but. So what you see there for that $10,221,000 is actually money that has been appropriated, not the grant in its entirety. If you flip over to page 2, you'll see the projects there. In that first one, I've tried to add a little parentheses next to each one, explaining what each one is. You'll see the Justice Center renovations up there in that top one several times, broken out into several different lines for what's appropriate for the spending of that money. You'll see the BOE CTE expansion line. You will see the contract with CDP, and you will see the purchase of the East Hawkins County Complex purchase. A lot of these object codes were duplications, so I tried to spread it out through multiple function numbers to try to avoid confusion. I hope that didn't just make it more confusing. It was an attempt to make it less confusing, so I hope that's how it's actually perceived. You'll see down in the next sections where I isolated the 911 contributions as well as the property assessor's vehicle. Down there in that third budget, you will see the Pink Hill Waterline project as well as the EMA vehicle. And if you flip over to the last page, you will see the hydrants, the VFW vans, and the Humane Society money, followed by the highway equipment, followed by the sheriff's department vehicles, and then lastly there you'll see the volunteer fire department and hazmat equipment. Now you'll also notice on that budget beneath that you'll see a transfer out. What that is that is the grant match that we agreed to for the health department. That health department funds will have state ARPA money added to it, so I wanted to get that out and put it in a separate place. You will notice that in Fund 171, but it's just a pass through. You'll see $450,000 revenue coming in, $450,000 expenditures going out. But because that has that mixture of that other ARPA money, I wanted to get it away from all of this so we could track it easier for accounting purposes and audit. Any questions on ARPA?
Can you give us because the way this is written, it really doesn't give us a true balance of ARPA at this time, right? Because it's,
Email I sent out to you was still accurate,
yeah, okay.
690-ish thousand, if I remember that off the top of my head.
I'll look at the email, you're right, I forgot that you said that.
No, you're welcome. But yes, you're right, from this budget, you cannot see the balance.
Yeah,
The balance that you see moving forward in that 23-24 column is just the interest. And that is not factored into that figure I gave you. Just another point of interest, the interest on this earnings is not bound by any ARPA restrictions. So at the end, when we spend all of the ARPA money, we could transfer that interest anywhere we chose to. General capital projects again, general fund just to help it out, wherever you would want to see fit to send that money. The interest is unrestricted. All right, no questions on ARPA. Moving right along to highway. And again, starting on the blue notes. The estimate of the current property tax is based on the current property tax rate of 2.3177, of which 11.87 cents is allocated for this fund. The assessment is based on the most recent information from the Processor's Office. The assessment valuation for budgeting is $1,289,724,161, and at the 3% collection rate, with 1 cent equaling $119,940.35. Current property taxes are estimated to finish roughly $40,000 above the budget amount for 22-23. However, the estimate for this revenue for the 23-24 fiscal year is estimated $50,000 less than the 22-23 budget amount due to the ratio and the reduced value of the penny. And that's going to create us a potential problem. Again, we just ran out of time, but I'm going to have to do we have a maintenance of effort with the highway department, which is a 5-year average of your local revenues. So that property tax is a local revenue that we just reduced it. So we're going to make sure we don't violate our maintenance of effort. If we do, not only are we supplying them less local funds, but however much we violate it by, the state will follow suit and reduce our gas tax by that amount. So not only will you lose once, you'll lose twice. So before we reconvene on the second draft, I will have hopefully had time then to run that 5-year projection and see if we have dropped below. And then what we would have to do, but there's only so many local revenues, so that is a tax increase if we have violated our maintenance of effort, at least for this fund, to get that back up to par, so we don't lose that state gas money as well. So just to be aware of that. The net total of estimated local tax collection for 22-23 appears to be more than what was budgeted by $52,000, but that increase was lost next fiscal year due to the reduced assessment. Overall revenues are fairly consistent with the amounts budgeted. Gasoline tax could be approximately $200,000 more than it was budgeted. This was one of the revenues we revised to keep our estimates conservative due to the pandemic. We will increase this projected budget for next year to come closer to realizing the actual amount of gasoline taxes being received. But that increase in gasoline tax does not solve our maintenance of effort, because that is not a local revenue, that is a state revenue. So the gain there does not help our maintenance of effort issue. The highway department has been approved for $370,000 in ARPA funds for various pieces of highway equipment. These monies will not be reflected in the Highway Fund 131. All those we just looked at in ARPA 128 fund. The highway superintendent will explain expenditures and any questions associated with them. However, I do want to go ahead and touch on something in this highway budget. If you look over page 2, you'll look at the projected revenues. We are showing an increase in revenues. A lot of that increase is a wash because he's showing an increase on the expenditures he plans to do with state aid and bridge projects. So the increase in revenue is offset by increase in expenditure. So there really is no increase in revenue, okay? But you'll see there $5.9 million is our total estimated revenue collections. If you flip over to page 6, please. You will notice the original budget had a deficit of 1.3. That doesn't sound great, however, that was a reduction. I did ask the former road superintendent to reduce this budget upon his leaving, because it had always been overinflated, but yet he had not fully expended it, which had kept us from having an issue in this fund. As you see, we're estimated right now to finish pretty close to where we were budgeted. Hopefully, as actuals come in, that'll be not quite as bad, which will boost our fund balance. But the area that concerns me is the estimated 23-24 budget. If you look at those expenditures that he has asked for, they have increased substantially. The revenue has not increased substantially. So, unless you intend to increase the revenue for highway substantially, this is not a sustainable budget. This cannot be passed as such. Nashville will not accept this. If you look at that ending fund balance compared to the $8 million in revenue, or expenditures, that does not pass the test. Where they recommend a minimum of 20%, this is closer to 4%.
Do you
So
have,
something has to give on this budget, whether that's a reduction from what he's asked for, or whether it's an increase in revenue, that's up to you all. But this budget needs work.
do you have, his increase or his request, like this page where we have county buildings, accounting, clerk and master with some requests? You don't have his listed out that way?
I do not. Historically, we have never done that, but I would like to draw your attention, starting at page 3. If you would look out at the 5th column, that is the increase or decrease from the 22 to 23, 24 year budget. And so that line will always show you what lines are increasing, staying the same, or decreasing. You'll see that fund there, that account, $12,895. Nothing really significant there. But if you would roll over to the next page, page 4, you'll notice a $1.2 million increase from the previous year. Several substantial increases requested in those lines.
He does his own, salary structure, pay scale, and all that.
That is correct. I'm glad you brought that up, because that was some cause for confusion and hurt feelings last year. When the county gives a COLA, it goes on scales. There is no scale in the highway. There is no scale to give a COLA to. I would love for there to be, but that's just currently not what we have. So when you give a COLA to general fund and solid waste, that scale moves by whatever percentage it is that you grant. Highway has always taken care of their raises internally. They've had more money in the budgetary lines than what was necessary to operate, or at least to the level that they operated. And so raises were given internally, usually in increments of a quarter, 25 cents on the hour, 50 cents on the hour. I think one time it was $1, but usually in quarter increments in the absence of a scale. So I think I've had several of you reach out and ask me in the past, why highway didn't get the COLA. Well, because their raises were handled internally every year. Because when the salary scale was redone, I think in 2014, if I'm not mistaken, they opted to not go on it. The sheriff's department opted not to go on it as well, but they still have a salary scale structure with rankings and years of service. The highway has just always, like I said, done an increment of usually a quarter somehow on their hourly rate.
So he's projecting, what, almost $900,000 in increased revenue in line items for employees. So I'm assuming that is for raises, or is that because he's adding employees? Do you know?
I do not know. At that level, I would assume we're talking about increasing staff. And I don't know what the intent of what this body wants out of the highway fund. I mean, I know that he's got a tall order to manage all the roads in the county. And, this may be what is more necessary to serve all the roads in the county. And that's fine, but then you have to fund it.
Well, the answer to that question probably is a mixture of both. I'm sure he probably has raises and increased staffing involved. I wondered. So, like, right now, is it 11.87 cents is allocated to this fund? If, in order to make it solvent, what would you recommend that to be instead of 11.87? for every penny, it's $119,000.
Mm-hmm, correct. I mean, to break even, which is, you don't have to get necessarily all the way to the break even point, but you're looking at over 21 cents, 21.5 cents to actually break even.
$2.5 million, right, his budget shortfall.
Yeah. Now, you don't have to get back to zero,
Right.
but you have to get a lot closer to 2.5. Because I can't send to Nashville a budget that's projected with a $368,000 fund balance with $8.5 million of expenditures projected.
And he'll be here today, or,
Check the schedule.
oh yeah,
He's our
4
last
o'clock.
one of today. All right, anything else on the highway? All right, hearing nothing, going on to the general debt service tab. Again, same property tax collection, I'm not gonna read that to you for the third or fourth time here. Now, the next paragraph has a little history. 18-19 fiscal year tax rate for this fund was decreased to 1 cent, with the remaining usual 7 cents being allocated to general capital projects fund. This allowed for proposed capital projects to be funded at the same amount as the refund to general debt service fund for repayment of the spec building in the Fixpin Industrial Park. Hawkins County was refunded by the Industrial Commission the principal and interest that had been paid to build the spec building in the amount of $721,248. So because of accounting practices and the way the comptroller wanted us to treat that, we couldn't put the proceeds from that money in a different fund. But what we did then was change the tax rate structure to be the equivalent of the refund of that building purchase. And so that was when we actually first established our general capital projects fund. The tax rate for 1920 was budgeted at 5 cents, which included returning 4 cents from the general capital projects fund tax rate. The remaining usual 3 cents was left as a portion of the tax rate general capital projects fund to fund the jail sewer grinder project and future projects. The tax rate for 2021 was budgeted at the same 5 cents, with the tax rate for 21-22 changing to 4.28. Now, that was not an actual reduction in the tax rate, that was reappraisal year. So that was the same amount of cents to create the same amount of revenue after reappraisal. The property tax rate for 22-23 and 23-24 in this fund includes returning another 2 cents from general capital projects fund. This is absolutely necessary in order to build sufficient revenue to meet future debt payments. So I had asked for some cents to come into this fund, and we weren't able to find any. So that's what happened, is I pulled them from general capital projects, which is, again, that's what I say, robbing Peter to pay Paul. It solves the problem here in debt service, which has to be addressed. It is not an option to default on these payments. I mean, these have to be solved. But it diminishes the fund balance growing in that capital projects fund, which will help head off future debt. Litigation taxes for jail courthouse, litigation tax and general debt service fund are used to retire debt for the Justice Center and courthouse renovation project. This year's estimated collections are up by $2,707 from last year. This revenue fluctuates from the original annual anticipated collection of $117,000 when the tax was established. Investment income, another small piece of good news. This is the account to which interest earnings on the county trustees' investments are recorded. Interest earnings are shared at this time with school cafeteria, general debt service, and education debt service funds. Projected interest earnings have been increased this fiscal year by some $57,000 over the previous fiscal year. However, due to fluctuating investment rates, such increases may not be sustained over the entire 23-24 fiscal year. They probably will be. But, you know, going to the market right now is terrible to borrow money because interest rates have went up. The flip side is our interest earnings on our idle funds have actually increased. So we saw those when interest rates were bottoming out. We got nothing on our idle funds, next to nothing. But now that is increasing, so it's a double-edged sword. You win some, you lose some, but at least our interest earnings are increasing. And you'll see that also in our education debt service fund. The division of the interest earnings that is being deposited in general debt service and education debt service fund has been determined by the amount of fund balance in each of these funds on a June 30th basis. The division for 22-23 fiscal year was 15.47 total interest earnings to general debt service and 84.53 for education debt service. If no motion is made to do otherwise, the division of interest posted to these funds will be determined in the same manner as in the 22-23 fiscal year. Projected interest division for 23-24 is 13.18% for general debt service and 86.82 for education debt service. The expenditures in this fund are to retire debt for purchase for property for or construction of the Justice Center Jail, renovation of the courthouse. There are now 3 separate bond issues for this debt. Other expenditures include paying agent fees, other debt service charges, and trustees commission. Paying agent fees and other debt issuance charges are fees paid to banks or financial consultants for administrative services related to our bonds, capital outlay notes, and or loans. And then down there below, you'll see Ms. Evelyn has took you out of history there of the general debt fund history about the tax rate, how it's fluctuated over the years. And then beneath that, she'll also have for you all the remaining loans and or bonds and how much is owed on them, principal and interest. 2016 and 19 bonds will be paid off in June 2025. The 2021 bonds will be paid off in March of 2036. Again, there's just not a lot you can really do with these funds. The debt payments are what we've obligated ourselves to, and the revenues have to be sufficient to make those payments.
So even with the extra pennies that we moved into this fund last year out of capital projects, the fund is still projected to be almost 300,000 underwater. Is that right?
That is correct. However, with the fund balance, that is an acceptable rate of bleeding out. Before that, you'll see the year was $500,000. That was not going to be sustainable. So you don't have fund balances in here depending on how much debt you issue that are too large. If so, you would just pay the debt off if it was eligible to be paid off. But in theory, you want your fund balance to decline at a rate that is coinciding with the reduction of your debt that's owed. So you make your last payment and the fund is about to be empty. That ever actually happens because we always issue some new debt. But that's the concept. So although yes, you're right, it's still underwater, it is now at a rate that's acceptable to satisfy our payments. And as those payments roll off in 25, the projection for this fund will then brighten significantly.
So that's acceptable and not as alarming because the function of this particular fund is different from the other funds.
Exactly.
Yeah, understood.
So, just out of curiosity, what is our total debt? What's our total debt liability right now?
62 million? Give me a minute of a break and I'll double check that for you. But I believe it's about 62 million. I hate to misquote that because I hear Bubba over here typing, so I better double check that.
Is that schools and county and schools?
That was total debt figure, yes. All right, moving along to highway debt service. Special debt service, which is what we use for the highway fund. The purpose of this fund is retired debt associated with highway, road, and bridge improvement or construction and or large equipment purchases. The special debt service fund is funded by 1/3 of certain wheel tax collections. And again, I don't mean to, some of you may already know this, but some of you may not. Everybody talks about the wheel tax. I pay $96 for getting my car renewed. The highway does not get $96. The highway gets 1/3 of the original $20. That is it. 1/3 of the original 20. So I know there's a lot of misinformation that goes on with that and how that works. 1/3 of the original 20. That is it. At one time, the 1989 gasoline taxes that were received from the state were transferred to the special debt service fund from the highway fund. However, that ceased in the 2011-12 fiscal year when the highway department needed that revenue to help with operating expenditures. The wheel tax collection still appears to be sufficient for retiring the current debt. Expenditures. Highway debt service fund budget includes payments for principal and interest on one refunded bond issued for highway and road improvements and or bridge construction and purchase of equipment. Outstanding debt on June 30th, 2023 will be as follows. Road improvement refund issued June 2019, and then you see the principal and the interest owed. Again, they have paying agent fees, other debt service charges, and trustees commission. So if you flip over, you'll see one singular revenue, and that would be the wheel tax, just to the tune of about $350,000. You'll see another fund that is upside down, but you'll see a fund balance that is sufficient with that diminishing to satisfy this debt. This is another debt that is scheduled to be paid off soon. I believe it is 25 or 26, and this one's scheduled to pay off. So we've got plenty of time, and no action needs to be considered this year. However, I just want to mention to you, when that happens, you have 1/3 of the original $20 wheel tax. If no new bonds are issued, if a new bond is issued, this conversation is completely null and void. But if no new debt is issued, you have 1/3 of that original 20 going to a debt service fund that doesn't need it. So my recommendation on that would be, in future years, to consider reallocating that 1/3 to a highway capital projects fund. And again, by the same logic, you can buy equipment with cash instead of having to finance it. Maybe even do a road, depending on how much you let it grow before you have your first needed expenditure. Now, there may be a circumstance that comes up where we have to issue debt before we get there. But if not, this is how we get ahead of not issuing debt. We have funds with cash to buy things that are necessary for the production of our highway department. But the reason I wanted to mention it to you so early is because any change to the wheel tax would require a 2/3 vote in 2 consecutive meetings. So it is a process to get that change. Nothing needs to happen soon, but just something I wanted floating around in the back of your minds, because it will come up during your tenure.
So, say one more time, when is the year that this debt is supposed to be exhausted?
It's either 25 or 26 that this rolls off. And so I just, wanted you to be thinking about a plan in the back of your minds for what are we gonna do with that 1/3. Now again, if he decides to do a major bond issue and you approve such, then that conversation's irrelevant. But if we get to the point where we've paid off this debt, we've not added any new debt specific to the highway, we have an opportunity to create a highway capital projects fund, which I would be in favor of. I know you guys gave him some ARPA money, but it's my understanding he still has a lot of older and out-of-date equipment. Having that go into a highway capital projects fund would definitely allow him to start modernizing his fleet and his equipment. And like I said, I know it's very expensive to pave the road, but if you don't touch it for a year or two, it would maybe allow him some road paving money as well. It's his regular operating budget. So, if nothing else on highway debt service, education debt service. The purpose of this fund is to record retirement of debt that is issued for schools. Most of the debt is retired from the property tax collection and wheel tax collection allocated to this fund. However, certain debt that is retired from the general purpose school fund is also recorded in this education debt service fund. These payments can be viewed as pass-through postings, since the revenue received from the Board of Education equals the amount paid out. You'll see there the same spiel on the property tax, same on the investment income, other than because this one receives the lion's share of it, you'll see it's surpassing it by $361,300 over last year's, which we did raise the future year budget for that figure, just didn't fully recognize it, the interest rates fluctuate, and don't want you to bank on revenue that's so volatile. Contributions. This account is used to record revenue received from the general purpose school fund to reimburse education debt service for scheduled principal and interest and administrative fee payments on the 2009 and 2010 QSCAP issues and the ESI loans. Even though the Board of Education funds retirement of this debt, accounting practices require that these payments be recorded through the education debt service. So those are the ones that we're referring to as pass-through. Board of Education takes care of that debt, but it has to flow through 156 education debt service. So. The interest division, as we discussed earlier. And then when you go over to page 2, you'll see all the outstanding principal and interest on the debt issues for the school. She also got some of them on there that have been refunded or paid off, but still just left them on there for you just for your reference. And then on page 3, the same, you'll see the tax history. Now sometimes it gets misrepresented. When you look here again, you'll notice, for instance, in 21-22, that was not a reduction to education debt services tax rate. That was the reappraisal. Okay, so sometimes you'll hear that get thrown around. So you took pennies. Well, we did not take pennies. those pennies were the same to be the equivalent of the 29 cents in the year previous, but because of reappraisal, we were able to reduce that down to 24.82. But that's when our certified tax rate was reduced. 2010 QSCAD, County Commission passed resolutions in June and August 2010 for Hawkins County to be a part of 2010 Qualified School Construction Bond issue offered to the Tennessee State School Bond Authority. At the time these resolutions were discussed with the Budget Committee and County Commission, the projection was that these bonds would be low-interest bonds, that the Board of Education would fund return of this debt, including principal, interest, and net administrative fees. The bonds were actually issued in such a way that the IRS would pay a subsidy to the entities who were participating, the total amount being the entire interest requirement for the issue until such time as the debt is completely retired. However, in 2013, this subsidy was subjected to a sequestration rate by the federal government, which reduced the amount Hawkins County was receiving. Therefore, the Board of Education had been invoiced the difference between the amount of subsidy received and the amount of interest that was paid for each fiscal year. All that's saying is the subsidy was reduced. It didn't fully cover the interest anymore. Because the intent was for the Board of Education to cover that, they picked up the difference. Subsidy is not restricted to debt service, but as the Board of Education is funding return of this debt, it is assumed that the subsidy will be used for the interest payments. The Office of State and Local Finance informed participating entities on June 6, 2011, the deposit of this subsidy must be deposited into the general fund in order to comply with IRS tax regulations. Therefore, in order for us to meet this compliance, this subsidy has been and will continue to be deposited into the general fund, with the equivalent amount being transferred to Education Debt Service Fund each time interest is due on the 2010 QSCAB issue. The General Fund and Education Debt Service Fund budgets will continue to reflect the appropriate line items to allow this process to happen. Also, there will continue to be applicable language regarding the issue in the appropriations resolution of the budget document. These procedures have been discussed with the State and Local Finance Office and with Local Government Audit. Debt management policy and updated debt management policy was passed by County Commission on May 23, 2022. You'll see that in your resolution packet again for this May, as it's one of the requirements of the Governor's 3-Star program that the debt management policy be reviewed annually by the County Mayor's Office and County Commission. There's no changes to it. It just needs to be reviewed and have a resolution passed annually. So there's your education debt service budget. You notice it has significantly more revenues than the highway debt service budget. 48130 is where the contributions come from general purpose schools. You'll see those flow in. Go over to page 2. You'll see that this fund balance is actually very strong and growing. So I hate to say this because at the same time, you don't want to rob Peter to pay Paul, but it is growing. You don't need a debt service fund to grow. This could be an area to consider taking a penny if you wanted to satisfy the highway maintenance of effort if we end up falling below it. However, I don't know the intentions of the school. That would be a question to ask them when they present their budget. If they have any large debt issuances that they would be trying to have you pass in the future, you may be better off to leave those pennies alone. Just something to consider. I know they got a lot of ESSER money that took care of a lot of their problems that were lingering, but I don't know the status of all the schools. I don't know if there's any major renovations or need for a new one. So there is pennies here, but you do want to get the full story from them too before you would make any decisions on those pennies. Any questions on education debt service?
So just to reiterate, our education debt service and our highway debt service, we are doing well on paying down that debt.
We're doing well in all of our debt service because I won't let the budget pass any other way. We cannot default on debt. It's just not an option. It's an embarrassment. It ruins our bond rating. It makes it extremely expensive when we go to the market. And if we have to do a bond issue, it's just not an option.
But these two funds in particular are doing really well.
This one doing the best. The highway still shows a negative expenditures over revenues. Education, if you look on the 22-23 projection, it's showing almost $500,000 to be good. If you look at 23-24, even with revenues conservative and expenditures, well, business don't be as high because they're pretty locked in, but you're still looking at $250,000. So just throwing it out there, 2 pennies, this is still in the black on a projection basis. But again, that being said, I'll follow right up with, you need to figure out what their intentions are, and what their needs are.
I think they got a lot of HVAC systems that are to their lot there.
So before you celebrate this fund, we have to figure out what their needs are. Do they have any pending bond issues that they're gonna be requesting in the future? Or has ESSER money been sufficient? But, just like our money, I'm sure their ESSER money is running out. Also, just to mention that the BEP is going away and is being replaced. Jason, help me, is it TISA? TISA? I always say it wrong. TISA is now the new funding model. Everything I've been hearing about it is good. We're going to see an increase. However, we have the same issue there slightly with the maintenance of effort on the local revenues and the declining value of the penny. But I spoke briefly with Melissa, and I believe there is still enough flexibility in their local option sales tax projection to keep us in compliance. But that is something that we're going to have to make sure she's happy with when they present their budget. Because that same reduction in the penny value affects that maintenance of effort just like it does the highway's 5-year average. And the increase in the state funding model, again, the state revenue, is not in the calculation for the local, which is where the maintenance of effort is focused on. Our last tab is our general capital projects budget. You'll see there on page 1, if you look back at 21-22 in our property tax, we were bringing in over $500,000, only projected $274,000. Now that's a mixture. That's not only the reduction in penny, but that's the reduction in cents that had to go to general debt service. So that fund, is still growing, but not at the level that it was when we had 5 cents in there, or 4.29 cents in there. If you look over to page 2, you will see 2 sums of money, that $337,500. That is the state of Tennessee's ARPA money that they are sending. And if you look down below, you'll see the $112,500 that was the transfer out from ARPA. Here's what the transfer in is. That totals up to $450,000 for that project. And on page 2, you will see that expenditure just washing out $450,000 down there at the bottom, 91140-707 building improvements under public health and welfare projects. Again, just wanted to isolate that project because it was not purely our direct ARPA allocation. Our direct allocation was only a grant match to unlock additional state ARPA money. So, putting that one over there separately. Other than that, if you look over to page 4, the only other expenditure you'll see is the Trustees Commission. No expenditures are budgeted here unless the commission approves them. So you'll see an estimated ending fund balance of 1.7 and a projected ending fund balance of $2 million at the end of 23-24. So I think a couple of you have asked me sometimes, do we not have somewhere else we can go for projects? This is the other place, but I would not recommend a large-scale project unless we're going to commit some more revenue. Otherwise, once it's gone, it's gone.
Yeah, we wouldn't want to commit to more than the amount of revenue that's in there. You wouldn't want to take out more than that.
Exactly.
On an average annual basis, right? You might do it 1 year, but the next year you don't need to, whatever.
Exactly.
If it's sustainable.
And that concludes my budget review. They don't have a break schedule, but I would highly recommend one before office holders start coming.
So, before we do that.
Okay.
Let me reflect on the concerns that you have. Let me reflect on the good that you have pointed out. And for the good, our deficit is nowhere near as terrible as we projected it to be,
Correct.
okay?
First and foremost, correct.
That's awesome. The debt service funds are a lot more soluble, are wonderfully soluble to the point where we may be able to even shift around to address needs.
Correct.
That's a good thing, right?
Yes. Up to the level of about 2 cents. 3 tops.
Okay. Any other big standouts for what's going well?
Solid waste fund. Solid waste fund's going very well. Local option sales tax, I think we can comfortably consider capping and redirecting some of that money to a general capital projects fund.
Anything else that you could identify as shining moments in the budget right now?
I think that'd be the extent of the highlights.
Okay, so with your concerns, the first major looming concern is the ratio, where our ratio has changed to 0.6
921.
to 1.
Yes, if it had not, our deficit in the general fund would be closer to $1.5 million, $1.6 million, which again is not in the black, but is not a terrible starting point.
Concern is for the highway department and the increase in their requests, that we can't pass a budget with 4% left in the fund balance if everything was issued as requested and nothing was changed in terms of revenue.
Correct.
Okay.
That'd be my most glaring concern, followed by, of course, the $2 million, considering we haven't yet looked at new requests and a COLA. My next concern would be those salary scales where we have, unfortunately, not intentionally, slighted certain people on the scale.
Okay, anything else that stands out to you as a glaring concern?
Just making sure that we have sufficient local revenues to satisfy the maintenance of efforts for highway and Board of Education. And I think the Board of Education one's already solved. I think we can took care of that one, but I've not seen the budget proposal yet, but per our phone call, I think it's taken care of.
So, and that sufficient local revenue for the highway is relating to that
5-year average.
5-year average.
Yes.
Anything else?
And that is separate from the concern with the expenditures, right? His
Correct.
maintenance of effort is a separate issue from the deficit of the fund itself.
The 5-year average is a problem no matter what you guys decide to do on the expenditure side.
Gotcha.
The only way that's not a problem is if you solve it by increasing his property tax revenue.
Okay.
But that's the only, let me double check before I tell you that. Okay, no, that's the correct statement. That is the only revenue though that you can manipulate in there. Every other revenue is the result of prior year's taxation and or things that are outside of our control. So the only local revenue that you can manipulate in the highways local revenues is current property tax. So there is nowhere else to go, other than robbing from other funds, which don't have property tax to give, other than, as I discussed, possibly that education debt service fund.
When is our first scheduled office holder meeting?
First scheduled office holder is 10 o'clock.
All right, let's go ahead and take